Hey everyone, it's Irene here. So we posted a Ask Me Anything a day or two ago. Here's one of the questions. I'm going to take the easier questions right now. A lot of these questions are answered on my YouTube channel already, but here's one that I want to get to. So this is from, looks like Nick. Is or can this type of work be done alongside concussion recovery, predominantly from cervical instability, or would it be too much for the nervous system? So, number one, it depends on the person, their regulation, where their system is at. What I will speak is generally. So I have done lots of work with folks who have had concussions. We would call this traumatic brain injury or TBI. I've had too many concussions to count, not from car accidents, but from whiplash from my days skiing and paragliding. I've hit my head pretty hard on ice as well as a figure skater. And I grew up during the time when we didn't wear helmets for any of this stuff. So, and obviously you don't wear a helmet when you figure skate. That would look very strange. But here's what we have to know about concussions. So what's interesting about this question is we think of concussion recovery as separate from nervous system work. But when we've had a concussion, we have put a shock into not just the brain, but into the entire autonomic nervous system. And my experience working with traumatic brain injury concussion is that people would see me, they'd come and see me after they've gone to the physios and the doctors and the eye specialists and all these things, and they're still struggling with fatigue, headaches, dizziness, pain. And from what I know, through all of my stuff and work and studies, is that the underlying shock trauma of the accident never got dealt with. So the entire physiology is still stuck in some form of fight, flight, freeze, along with the impact that is stuck in all of the tissues. And it can be the skeleton, it can be the muscle. Usually, from my experience, it's the fascial lines that are holding on for dear life, and then that's keeping the system from healing. And then, of course, there might be fear, which, while that's an emotion, it's really a deep survival response. If someone almost died when they acquired this concussion through a shock trauma, like say a car accident, for example, there is a portion of their system that prepared for death. We would call this a near-death experience. When you've had a near-death experience and you're conscious of it, there is a, oh shit, I might die moment. And our system prepares for that. And so part of the work, and this is where somatic experiencing can come in beautifully, and it depends on the practitioner. Not all SEPs are equal in how they might work with this. But you got to work with that moment right before or right after, or a series of the moments before and after, and what we would call kind of the ground zero of the accident, to dissipate that shock. What I've found is when you work with that ground zero moment, or the moment right before, or the moment right after, it takes the edge off of the autonomic nervous system. And then what happens when you take that edge off, when you get out of that locked near-death experience, survival stress, it allows the system to heal. This is parallel to those of you who are maybe living with a chronic illness, autoimmune. The gut comes to mind, gut problems, where you're trying to treat the area like the gut, and nothing's working because there's an underlying physiological coupled effect where the system thinks it's in danger, it thinks it has to protect, and so the flow in the GI tract is wonky. The nutrients can't absorb in because the system doesn't have enough true rest digest, which is a part of our parasympathetic nervous system, specifically the low tone branch of the dorsal, the vagus nerve. And so if we are stuck in survival, stuck fight, flight, or freeze, which is the high tone dorsal vagus of the parasympathetic, we can't have tissue healing. We can't have gut lining repair. Our immune system doesn't enhance because we're not going into that deep rest digest. I think of it like a gearbox. We're not going into that kind of neutral gearbox where we're regenerating and building up and building up. So it's the same with the brain. The brain needs a ton of oxygen, needs a ton of sugar, and I don't mean table sugar, I mean glucose, needs energy. And so when we are still stuck in the shock trauma of that accident that might have caused the concussion, the brain can't heal. It doesn't get the goodness of being in that deep rest digest state. So to go back to the original question, can this type of work be done alongside concussion recovery, or would it be too much? The answer is it depends what the work is. If it's the version that I teach and my colleagues teach, which is slow, foundational building of capacity and not worrying about figuring out the brain, but building the capacity in the nervous system, getting ourselves out of survival stress, and that might be just our life or that might be one event, right? We want to work with that first in a very titrated, slow, committed way. If it's that kind of work, then I say actually do that work first, because when you take the survival stress out of the system, the brain just starts to heal on its own. Now, of course, if the brain damage was so severe that a person has, and even memory loss would go into this, but if there's like severe damage, and by severe, I mean, I don't even know what I would call it, because I've seen severe damage be reversed by this, but let's say a spinal cord injury and the autonomic nervous systems are being challenged. Like if a person can't breathe on their own, if they can't regulate their bowels, if they have to have catheters and that kind of stuff, then that's a different situation, very different. But if this question is coming from the person who has that concussion and you're able to write clearly and you can think and you can walk and you can talk and you can make your food and get up and do things, then chances are doing this slower, deeper sequenced nervous system work is exactly what I recommend. And the key is that you monitor how things go. It's so subtle, this work, that it's done in a way that we typically pace ourselves and we can feel the shifts because they're being done, or they're happening, I should say, at a slow, slow pace. What I don't recommend is what I often hear people do when they go to concussion specialists and they start to do fancy, crazy eye work, and they're put on things to test and train their muscle reflexes and all of that. And again, if you haven't dealt with those initial shock pieces of the accident, you're just loading too much onto the system, and then that can actually make the system go into more of a dysregulated state because you're just overriding and adding too much pressure to the system. The final thing I'll say, this is more alongside of pain in the muscles, things that might feel stuck. You mentioned in this question cervical instability. Think of a gunshot wound. Strange way of looking at it, but if the bullet stays stuck in the body, it needs to come out. And so if we hit our head And if that shock into the tissues is still stuck sitting somewhere, we need to open up, not the brain, not for real, but we need to do some kind of really good either osteopathic work or craniosacral work, preferably osteopathic work, or some form of fascial work, so that we can release the force that went into the skull and have it exit. Now, if you work with someone who's really good at doing osteopathic work, fascial work, and understands trauma, they can work with you to help disengage the tensions in the skeleton, in the fascia, in the muscle, in the movement patterns that could actually be contributing to that cervical instability. Because again, if one area is fighting for dear life, other areas around it, they might get more tight to protect, or they might go, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to shut down and I'm going to not have tone in my musculature, which could lead to instability. I hope that makes sense. So again, I use this example of a gunshot wound. It's kind of a strange one, but I know from first aid, you got to get that bullet out. And you then want to, once that's out, do the healing to make sure all the pathways that it might have impacted get worked with. So again, this is where a combined approach of really good somatic trauma work and really good body work, really good nutrition, ensuring that we're building up all those pieces is super, super important when it comes to concussion recovery and brain injury.